In tying in with your series, I have a message today that's simply entitled, How to Navigate the Storms of Life. So I know in this room, there will be people that are in a storm. And I think in life, I've realized this. We're either going into a storm or we're coming out of a storm. But when you're coming out of a storm, you're going to be going back into a storm. And that just seems to be life. And the sooner that we realize that storms and hard times don't come because God is mad at us or he's paying us back, but they simply come because that's how life is designed. We're going to go through challenges. We're going to go through difficult times. In fact, they say one of the oldest books in the Bible is the book of Job. Do you know that? Think about the book of Job. It's about somebody who was so righteous, who did everything right, and yet their whole life fell apart. Satan came, right, to test someone. God didn't say, Job, oh, I know this guy, he's horrible. He's cheating on his wife, mess with him. He said, no, he's the best guy. Mess with him. His life is great. Mess with him. Maybe you're going through trials today because you're the best. Maybe you're going through trials today, not because things are, because you're messing up, but you're doing it right. And so we need to learn that we have to go through these difficult times. I've had many people tell me, Pastor, I need your help in this area. And I've literally had them multiple times say this, I know that you don't go through these problems. I know you never faced anything, but can you help me? And I go, hang on, I'm just like you. My wife and I, we get mad at each other. We get upset. We say things we shouldn't say. I have bad habits. I mess up. My wife and I, when we first got married, we used to argue all the time. We had one car and she would have to drop me off at church early in the morning and we would get in the biggest arguments of the week would be Sunday morning before church. I kid you not. It was like a year that we would fight and scream and then put on the fake face when we walk into church. Come on. How many of you got the fake face on right now, all right? God knows what happened in the car and you came in, you were mad and you get everybody, hey brother, how you doing? Awesome. We stopped, thank God. You say, how'd that happen? Well, we got 2 cars, all right. So I drove to church by myself. But we have storms that come. It could be a divorce. It could be an unplanned pregnancy. It could be an affair, sickness, the death of a loved one, betrayal, the loss of a job, a jail sentence, a foreclosure on a home. The list goes on and on. Storms happen. Some of them are self-inflicted. Sometimes it's the mistakes that we make, and sometimes they just happen. All I know is this, is that no matter how the storm comes, no matter how the challenges come in life, we can't give up. We can't give up. Don't give up. I don't know what you're going through today. Don't give up. As I was getting ready to share this message at our church a couple of months ago, a friend of mine texted me in the morning, and I loved what he said. He just said, grace always wins. And can I remind you today that grace always wins in your life? I think it's one of the greatest slogans we can have. The church is great at talking about grace, but we've been very poor at executing God's grace towards people in our life. And it's today to think that, well, if Jesus is in my life, then life is gonna be easy. I have Jesus, I shouldn't have these problems. The Apostle Paul, he wrote about some of his trials in 2 Corinthians 11:23. He's talking about some of these other people saying, are they servants of Christ? And he goes, I know I sound like a madman, but I served him far more. I've worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I've faced danger from rivers and robbers. I've faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I've faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. I've worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty and often have gone without food. I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. How many know Paul faced some challenges? Could you imagine if you had that disclaimer before you gave your life to Jesus? I know you want to get saved, but read this because this could happen. Paul was doing the will of God and he went through all of those problems. He was on assignment from heaven, and he went through all of those challenges in his life. And what his life proves is that serving God doesn't make life easy. Trials are a normal part of life. And the faster we can get that into our thinking, the faster we'll stop crying about our problems and start trying to work through our problems and our challenges. 1 Peter 4:12 says, dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through. You ever get surprised, like, why is this happening? Don't be surprised as if something strange were happening to you. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it's revealed to all the world. Now, I'm still working on that part because I've never been glad when the trials come. I'll be honest with you, okay? I don't know about anyone watching online or at a location. I haven't been, yes, another trial. I get to improve myself. No, I'm working on that. But he says, be glad because we're partners with Christ. Do you realize that Jesus had to wear the crown of suffering before he ever wore the crown of glory? And a lot of us, we just want the crown of glory, but we don't want the suffering that precedes that. James says, dear brothers and sisters, when, everybody say when. Not if, not maybe if trials come, no, but when they come, when troubles come your way, consider it an opportunity for joy, for you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Why do we experience difficulties in life? Well, I've learned that pain prompts change. And that pain is a precursor to growth. If you've ever worked out in the gym and you lift some weights, what do you hope to feel a couple of days after pumping some weight? You want to feel some pain. Honestly, if you went to the gym and you lifted weights and you didn't feel anything, you would probably think, oh man, that wasn't a good workout. It's the pain of your muscle fibers ripping, and that pain of that healing of when they grow back, but guess what? They grow back a little stronger. So you're experiencing that pain, but now you know, oh wow, that was a good workout. Because you know now, because of this pain, because it's sore, you got to T-Rex everything for a couple of days, right? Brushing your teeth and turning on light switches because you're sore, but you're not complaining because you know your muscles are going to grow back a little stronger, and the next time you're going to be able to push a little more weight, and you want the process to go again. And that's the same thing in our life. When we experience pain and we work through the pain, you can know this, is that when you get through that storm, you're gonna come out a little stronger. And that's why with the things you've gone through, when you look back, when you thought it was the hardest thing ever, you look back at that and you say, boy, I wish I was facing that problem now instead of this one. Because you've grown through that pain. And so today I wanna give you 5. I'm usually a 3-point guy. You're gonna get 5 points today, all right? You're gonna get the bonus points, just like the bonus fries when you get them in the bag, right? I'm gonna give you 5 points when it comes to navigating the storms of life. Number 1 is this: you will only grow to the capacity of your pain. You're only gonna grow to the capacity of your pain. What makes successful people? Think about successful people. Is it because they had the best education, or they had the most money, or they went to the best college? Or no, let me tell you what the most successful people, what you're gonna realize is this: they all have a high capacity for pain. They have a high capacity and a higher tolerance than the normal person. You know that risk can be very painful. And these are people that simply took crazy risks when others pulled back. They emptied their bank accounts. They mortgaged their homes. They put it all on the line to get started. And when others might have quit or pulled back because they didn't want to take a risk, these are people who went forward and they became successful because they weren't afraid of the pain in the moment. We often settle or even quit when pain gets too tough. You want to ask, if you ever ask, what makes a strong marriage? You know, when you look at a great marriage, those are 2 people that have a high pain tolerance. That's what it is. They have a very high pain tolerance. You get these newlyweds that can't handle, right? And everything, I don't like you. I'm going to sleep on the couch. I don't want every little thing. I just learned the older I get, the less things bother me. And the same with my wife. We've just learned to increase our pain. I don't have to talk back on everything. I don't have to give my opinion on everything. She might have said something that irritated me, and I can close my mouth, and 15 minutes later, I don't even remember what it was. Strong families have a high pain tolerance. Strong businesses have a high pain tolerance. Strong churches have a high pain tolerance. Every year, they say 4,000 churches close their doors in America. See, we got to learn how to push through pain and difficulty. We're in the middle of building our church building, and it's been a process. I got advice, don't ever start building a building in a pandemic, all right? We started in 2020. And it's been an up and down challenge, finances and the county and wars with this. And we've been going through and me questioning, why did we do this? Should we have done something smaller? And through all of that, it was last year, the property next to our church went on the market. And I said, man, I don't know how we're gonna buy. That's the only place we could expand to. We're surrounded by cemetery, graveyards, and the Mormon church. On the other side, everyone's dead around us, except for that property right there. Right there. Spiritually. And it went, and I just said, God, why now? Why couldn't they put it for sale after the building was done? And we had to process through that. And we figured out a way how to secure the property. We did it, but there's always challenges. You know, my mom and dad pastor, they're still pastoring today. When I was 19 years old, when they were pastoring, I remember my dad calling me in, and he said he wanted to talk to me, and I thought I was in trouble for something, and we met. And I remember at that moment, my dad, you know, emotional, and telling me that my sister was pregnant. She wasn't married, and she was pregnant. You know, back in the 90s, about 95, 96, I mean, that it's not a good thing now, but it was really not a good thing then, especially in the church world. And I remember that being such a huge weight on my parents, having to process through how to deal with that situation, whether or not they were gonna keep pastoring, were they gonna put up, what were people gonna say, were people gonna leave the church? And it was a very painful time for my parents. And fortunately, through that, when the storm came, they went through the storm rather than running away from the storm. They processed through that, and they made it. And I was just so glad to see what God did in that moment. But I can tell you, imagine my shock 29 years later, when last October, after a Sunday morning service, sitting down after church, having my daughter come to my wife and I to tell us that she was pregnant. And I could tell you that right at that moment, I didn't have the words to say. I was shell-shocked beyond measure. My daughter was leading worship on staff with us at the church. Wouldn't have expected that at all. She had only found out that night, Saturday night. She was telling us Sunday afternoon. And it really started us on a journey of, God, how are you gonna get us through this? I'm thinking we got so much going on, and now to throw this on top of it, how are we gonna navigate through this moment? My wife and I, we were at loss. And then a month later, to find out our son was gonna have a baby. And it was a very difficult time, both of them not married. And it started us on a journey that we would have never expected. We'd always told our kids to be careful. Of course, they knew the story of what had happened in our family and with my sister. As we're going through this project, I'm reminding them, put your guard up. We're in this time, we're building. We need to have our guard up. And yet, even with the best that we thought we were doing, we were caught off guard. If it was any other kids, you know, even in our church, it wouldn't have been a discussion on the platform, but we realize as pastors, we live in glass houses, and people are watching us, and they're looking at us, and sometimes talking about us and saying negative things. And it was just being a part. But I told our church is that if you're part of our church, you're not only going to hear the messages I preach, you're going to get to see the messages that we live. And it was going to be at that moment I realized we're going to have to really walk in this moment with love and grace. I remember God speaking to me at that moment and saying, you're thinking you're building a church right now. And what he said is, you're going to see what kind of church you're already built by the response that happens in this moment. And so when I talk to you about storms, it's not a theory, it's not an idea, it's not a podcast I heard. I'm through them, I'm going through them, and you're gonna get to hear part of our story today. But I'll tell you this, if you're going through a storm, I can tell you from my own experience, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. You have to decide that it's gonna be okay. And I'm so proud of my kids that in that situation, they weren't afraid of us or the church to go and get an abortion to hide anything, but they kept the babies. And that's one of the things that we were most grateful for. And I want to encourage you, if you've ever in that situation, choose life. Choose life. I know some have made mistakes, and I'm not here to judge you on that, but if you're here going forward, always choose life. And this situation was really difficult for my daughter. And we all have hopes and dreams for our kids. Isn't that right, parents? We want the best for them. And here my daughter was finding herself to be a single mom. I had the unique opportunity to see this from 2 points with a son and a daughter going through it. But even my daughter as a single mother and stepping up in that. And I'm so appreciate I know there's single moms in this room. God bless you. God bless you. Single dads, God bless you too, especially you single moms. If you're raised by a single parent, call them up today and just appreciate them. All the hard work they did, how they bent over for you, maybe took an extra job, they drove you while they were tired and they'd cook for you and they did all those things. It's just an amazing thing. When I found out, I was just shocked. And I remember not really saying much, walking into my room, laying down in my bed, my mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. How are we gonna do this? How are we going to do this? It was the last thing that I expected. And again, my daughter, she's processing it. She hadn't even known for 24 hours. She's processing it. She's in her room. She's crying. I'm laying there. And I just feel the Holy Spirit speak to me in that moment. You know, a lot of times when times get tough, we just want to think about ourselves. And I remember the Holy Spirit speaking to me and say, you're still her father. You're her voice of authority in her life. You need to speak into her right now. And I didn't know what I would say. And I remember getting out of bed and I walked into her room and she was crying and just in the corner there in her bed. And I walked in, she's crying, my heart's broken. I remember calling her, I said, Melody, and she looks at me and I took her hand her face in my hands like this. And I remember I said, look at me. And I looked at her right in the eyes. And at that moment, I feel God spoke to me and I just said, Melody, your path is now different, but God's purpose for you remains the same. And you know, the second thing that I want to encourage you with today, if you're in a storm, is that God's purpose for you remains. Your mistakes don't disqualify you from what God has called you to do. And I wanted to remind her that although now her path would look different, that God's plan for her life was the same. Her purpose was still the same. Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Look at the person next to you and just tell them your story's not over. God's purpose for us remains. And it's natural to feel like messing up disqualifies us, but challenges equip us for our purpose. Think of what you've overcome in your life today. And because you've overcome it, now you can speak into other people's lives about it. I think that there are people that you begin to find your purpose in your challenges. You find your purpose in your pain. And I can't tell you how many times I've messed up and I thought that God couldn't use me anymore. But what I realized is just that my mistakes now gave me a platform to help others, to let them know I've been there and I've made it through. You see, we need to realize today that God's purpose remains in our life. Don't give up on your purpose. As we navigate the storms, The third thing is to know that we have to initiate the right conversations. Initiate the right conversations. Our initial conversations have the most impact. They begin to frame how we see things. And I thought of it as we were talking about Arbor, Pastor Jared's grandson, something that happened. But if you have little kids, you know what I'm talking about. You ever have a little kid like fall down or something and they're about to cry, and they look to you and your reaction determines what happens with them, right? Like my wife was a little more of a drama queen. And when they do that, the kids are like, or they can fall and then you can just be like, oh, wow, oh, you're strong, that was good, you're okay, come up. And they just get, yeah, I'm okay. You know, that's a lot like our life, our initial conversations. When things get bad, if you call people, you call the wrong person, and if their first words you hear is, oh my gosh, you're messed up. That happened to my brother, he never recovered. He lost everything. My goodness, I don't know how you're gonna make it. And we've had some of those things spoken in this situation. What a difference versus the first words of people that are saying, it's gonna be good, God is gracious, God is kind, you're gonna make it through. In that first hour, I had to get the right conversations. I called Pastor Jared. Pastor Mike Kai, who was here a couple of months ago. I called Pastor Jurgen Matthesius. I called Pastor Shane Baxter from Australia, who's been here to speak. And I called these men and I told them what was happening. And I needed them to encourage me at that moment. Who are the people that you're talking to? The right conversations will begin to frame it in the right way. I was so glad when I called Pastor Shane. I don't know if you remember him, but he's the Aussie bloke. I remember I'm telling him, and he's very sympathetic, but there reaches a point when he just goes, that's how he laughs. He goes, sorry, mate for laughing, but you're gonna be a grandpa. Nothing you can do about it. And that was the first time I laughed. I said, that's right. There's nothing I can do about it. Those conversations helped me frame my narrative. It helped me frame what my future was gonna look like. And I tell you, it's so important that we initiate those conversations so that number 4, we can begin to frame the correct narrative. Frame the correct narrative. You can look at your situation with hope or no hope. It's up to you. I knew that this season would be tough, but I also made up my mind that I wasn't gonna say anything negative about it to anyone or to my kids. I wasn't gonna be negative. I wasn't gonna complain. I was gonna frame the correct narrative. You and I, we have the ability to create our narrative. The way that you choose to look at things will determine how you see it. You know, even with our church building, I was complaining a lot. I would complain and I was mad at everybody, and I'd be like, don't ask me when it's gonna be done, you know, and this and that. And one day I just realized I gotta shut my mouth. And I made a decision that I wasn't gonna complain about our building anymore. In fact, I started saying, we have the best contractors. We have the finances. Thousands are gonna get saved. And I began to declare the word of God. I realized I had to change my narrative because my complaining wasn't changing anything. It's amazing how much better things can be if we just change the narrative. I ran into the mayor of Hilo when this was going on, and I remember sharing, I said, I'm gonna tell him what's happening, shared with him about my kids. I didn't know how he would respond, and I loved his response. He just looked at me and goes, this is amazing. That's great. They're gonna get to grow up together. They're gonna be so close. I said, well, that's a great way to think about it. Other people that I would tell, they said, man, it's so good that you're having them while you're still young and you can run around with them. I said, yeah, that is. See, are we positive or are we gonna be negative? If you're in the storm today, frame the right narrative. And if you know someone in the storm, start framing the right narrative in their life. They don't need any more negativity. There's a lot of negativity in the world. frame the right narrative. And here's the last one. As you navigate the storms, you got to remember this. You are not alone. You're not alone. As we've gone through this journey, the one thing my daughter told me, he said, Dad, I'm just shocked. I'm shocked how many ladies, young and old, grandmas, have come to me and said, I was exactly where you are. I gone exactly through what you're going through right now. I shared this message in our church, and at the end of the service, I can't tell you how many women came up to me and they had a story. Stories. I had grandmothers with tears in their eyes telling me how they begged their son and daughter-in-law who were going through marital problems. And they were pregnant, begging, just give us the baby, we'll take the baby. But they ended the baby's life in tears and brokenness. We had pastors' families visiting from the mainland. They came to me and said, we went through this with our kid. I just want you to know you're not alone. One of the greatest lies that the devil can convince any of us today is simply this: you're the only one. You're the only one addicted to porn. You're the only one having marriage problems. You're the only one feeling depressed. And when we think we're the only one, what happens? We pull back. We hide. That's why I encourage people all the time, get into, here it's called circles or small groups. You need to get into these groups. Because when you get around other people, what you realize is that everyone's pretty much just as messed up as you are. You're not alone. We're all going through things, and that we can all encourage each other to grow in our faith, to push through the storms of life. It's so important. Hebrews 4:14 says that since we have a great high priest who's entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. Jesus understands. He was faced with temptation. He understands what you're going through. And when you're going through tough times, the worst thing you could ever do is to run from God. Run to God. When you're going through tough times, don't stop coming to church. You need to get into church. You need to get around people, because that's just going to help you get through the storm. Psalm 23, when I walk through the valley. A lot of times we're like, God, take me around. Take me. No. It's when you go through that your faith is going to be developed. And today, if you're experiencing these struggles, don't give up. Don't give up. God is faithful. He's faithful. I can tell you from my own story, he's faithful. We don't got it all figured out yet. Trust me. There's still things we're working out. But I'll tell you what, there's hope. There's hope in these difficult times. And as we get ready to close, I just want to show you this picture. And it's our little Theodore on the left, my daughter's boy, and Conan on the right. And he's named Conan because my son thinks Conan O'Brien is the funniest. And literally, but I see these two babies, and I was, one morning, it's like 3 a.m, he was up, little Teddy, I call him Teddy, and I'm holding Teddy, and I'm just looking at him, I'm like, I love you so much, I love you so much. And I'm telling my wife, I don't even remember loving my kids as much as I love them. I kid you not. And it really is true that grandkids are God's reward for not killing your own, okay? I promise you. But put that picture up one more time. And that last picture, put that up one more time. And I look at these boys, and I can tell you, 10 months ago, I didn't know what it would look like with us going through that storm. But now that I'm on the other side of it, if there was a button I could press to reset everything so that it never happened, I would never press it. I would never trade this. I would never trade them. As painful and as difficult as it was, and the tears that have been shed and the words that have been spoken and the challenges we face through this, I would never trade this. On the other side of the storm, looking back, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And maybe right now you're on the front end of the storm. I want to promise you, when you make it through, you're going to look back and you'll realize, I won't trade that experience for anything. God is able to make beautiful things out of the difficult things of life.